Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Wednesday. We're so happy that you've joined us today. I'm Caroline Berger, Director of Corporate and Community Relations for the University of Health Sciences in Phoenix. And I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Allison Otu, who is our Executive Director, and Anne-Marie Medina, who is our Director on the Tucson campus. We're so happy that you've joined us today. This is supposed to be an interactive session, so we invite you to communicate with us and send us your questions by leaving a question in the chat box, which you're going to see at the bottom of your screen. Today, we're very lucky. We not only have one, but a very special surprise. We have two presenters for today. So we're going to give them about 20 minutes to share all this great knowledge with you and leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. So please be sure to use that chat function because we would love to get your questions and your comments. That's what we're here for. Also, after today's session, be sure to be on the lookout for a post-event email. We'll send you all the resources that are going to be presented today. The email will also include a short 2-minute event evaluation. And we want to thank you in advance for completing this and also sending us recommendations and feedback for future programs. It's really important for us to hear from you. That's why we're here. You'll also receive a link to all of our past sessions, including a video link from today's session, so that you can share that with all your family and friends. As I said, today we not only have one, but two presenters. I'm very excited for this. First, I want to introduce Jen Parlin, who is the lead for the Garden Kitchen, a seed-to-table whole health program located in South Tucson. Jen has been with Pima Extension for 9 years, and in that time has completed a master's degree in public health and started a hands-on culinary education through the Garden Kitchen. If you remember, for those of you who were back in May, Jen was with us and gave us some great tips on how to keep our produce fresher longer, something really important nowadays. Well, today she's back and she's going to talk about how to best grow that produce in your own garden, even in Arizona. Yes, that can be done. And accompanying her is Parker Filer. Parker is the Assistant Agent in Horticulture at the Pima County Cooperative Extension. His duties include leading the Pima County Master Gardener Program and Pima Smartscape Program. Easy not for me to say. Parker began studying plant sciences at Yavapai College in 2001. He later earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Plant and Soil Science from the University of Hawaii and a Master's degree in International Agriculture and Rural Development from Cornell University. So please welcome Jen and Parker.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us again today. I am very happy to be joined by my esteemed colleague Parker. We are going to talk to you about fall gardening today. And I know it's very, very hot out in southern Arizona, so thinking about a fall garden might be not exactly where you're at. But I think having a plan about a garden is really even more important than all the logistics of how you put that plan into place. So when you're thinking about starting a garden, maybe for the first time or getting back into it as a hobby, I want you to look at the space that you're considering and think about a couple of different factors. The first one is sunlight. Plants need about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day to be very successful. So even though the sun will change a little bit as we go into the fall, look at your space now and see if you do get that 6 to 8 hours. Is there something that really shades your space, or conversely, is your space have all the sun all day long? Think about that, and that's going to help you to determine how you're going to plant. We're also going to think about pests or potential pests. Now, not even in the traditional sense. If you're thinking about a windowsill garden, maybe think about your cat or your dog. Do they get very excited about digging in the dirt? Or are they really excited about new things that are around? So you'll have to protect your garden from that. If you're thinking about planting outside, think about not only bugs and insects, but also, do you have a lot of birds or ground squirrels? Here at the Garden Kitchen, we often have some cats that like to come into the garden. So think about how you're going to protect the garden from those different factors. Then we're going to think about water. We want to make sure that gardening is as easy as possible for ourselves. So think about, where's that water source going to come from? You're going to have to drag a hose all the way around or take a huge bucket of water somewhere every day. Think about that and make sure it's as easy as possible for yourself. And the fourth thing I want you to think about, which is probably the most important one, is how much commitment do you want to make to this garden? Is this something you want to do with the whole family? Is it somewhere you want to meditate or start a new hobby? Or is it somewhere that maybe you just want to visit once a week? That's really going to help you to determine what kinds of things you're going to plant there, okay? So we're going to think about our plan, and we have our 4 factors when we're thinking about our space: our sunlight, our pests, our water, and then our commitment. And then we're going to think about, okay, now what are we going to plant in? I really like pots, especially if you are a beginner gardener, because you can move them around. If you misjudged where the water was or the sunlight, or maybe there's a brand new animal in your yard now that there's green things that you were not ready for, you can move those plants around. You can also move them as the season changes. So maybe where you have it right now is really great for the fall and the winter, but in the summer, it's going to need some shade. Make sure that when you're purchasing those pots that you'll be able to pick it up with soil and a plant in it, just so that it's easy. Also in the fall, sometimes we push our pots together so that it makes a little microclimate that's warmer than if just one pot was alone, okay? So then we have raised beds. You could also plant in that. You could purchase a raised bed, or you could construct one yourself. I really like a raised bed that's made out of concrete block for our environment, because our conditions are really harsh during the summer. I feel like it lasts a long time. So those blocks are nice, but they are very sharp on the corners. So consider that. Do you have pets that run around the yard a lot, or kids of a certain height? Make sure that they're not going to bump into it or anything like that. Also, if you or someone else in your household would like to be able to sit to garden, make sure that you build the bed at that height so it's easy for them. The other thing to think about with an above ground bed is that you can reach halfway across it so that you can access all of the space in that bed. You can determine whatever kind of shape you like, a square or a rectangle. We have some U-shaped ones here at the garden kitchen because that fits really well, and we're able to reach our hand across and at least get to the middle. That way you don't have to get up inside the bed or make a path in the bed or something like that. The last one for me is in ground. So we have a sunken in-ground bed here at the garden kitchen so that we're able to passively harvest water when it rains. That's a really nice advantage for us, but you could do it at the height that you wanted to. The things to consider are contamination in this. So for pots and for raised beds, you get to determine all of the soil that goes into those. For an in-ground bed, you really need to think about what else happened in the area to make sure, especially if you're growing foods, that you're not having contaminated soil. So were there lead paint chips maybe, or were there tires on the property at some point? Is it really close to roof runoff or something like that? Think about that before you start to dig out your in-ground bed. It is really great because it's very budget friendly, and if you have kids that have been trapped inside or you have been trapped inside, everyone can grab a shovel and help. In southern Arizona especially, we need to think about caliche, which is a really like clay kind of sand soil. We had to jackhammer out our sunken bed at the garden kitchen because we are over a giant vein of caliche. That ended up being more work intensive and more expensive than we had originally thought. So if you know things about the area that you want to plant, that's really helpful for you to be able to plan, okay? So now we have our plan. We've thought about what we're gonna plant in. Then what are we gonna plant in the fall? I love a fall garden here. We have so many opportunities to grow all different kinds of varieties of things. Wherever you are, I would say first consider what grows well in your area. You could go to a local store where they're more experienced maybe they garden themselves at home and ask, or you could get some seeds for yourself. You could also look online to see what zones you're in, but especially for southern Arizona, we can grow all different kinds of things that are heritage plants, as well as things that work in a Mediterranean climate, except for the rain. So think about what can you not get very easily at the grocery store, or what is very expensive at the grocery store. Try to plant those kinds of things. For instance, we don't really grow any orange carrots at the garden kitchen because I can grow red ones and yellow ones and white ones, and then I get to pull all of those out, and it's very exciting to see. So especially for southern Arizona in the fall, we can do all manner of green. We have all kinds of lettuces. We have grazing greens, dark leafy greens that you can eat raw. Also, lots and lots of kinds of root vegetables. So carrots, beets, rutabaga, radishes, all of those different kinds of things. And then herbs. Some of our herbs that are woody stemmed, like the ones I have here, are perennial, which means that you can grow those season after season and you only have to plant them one time. So things like sage and rosemary we see all over, savory, things of that nature. And then some of the soft stemmed herbs as well, like parsley, cilantro, and dill. For even more information on what we can grow in all of Arizona, actually, we have this great publication that you will get the link to when you get the post survey. It's called The 10 Steps to a Successful Vegetable Garden, put on by our own master gardeners. And then you can see what elevation you're at and then when you should be planting specific plants. I'm going to turn it over to my friend Parker, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about soil.
Okay, thanks so much, Jen. And similarly, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having us. Like my esteemed colleague, the Wellness Wednesdays concept goes really to the heart of what we do in cooperative extension, trying to share best practices and learning to improve the lives of Arizonans. So the fact that there's 70 of you here joining us and interested in producing your own food at home is really, really heartening. And it's a good time of the year to be doing that. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Jen started with some really great considerations to consider up front, including what you like to eat, how much it costs, who else is going to be sharing your garden space. And once you have all those factors of microclimate, including sunlight, considered, I just wanted to share some key concepts about soil health and water, because those are other really important factors. So just as a review, soils are super, super important. Dirt is kind of a dirty word. We prefer to call it soil. It's this really dynamic living matrix of physical, chemical, and biological properties. And cumulatively, the function of soil in natural ecosystems is to support and anchor plants, to provide them nutrients, to filter and store water. And of course, they create a habitat in their canopies, even in their roots, and store carbon. So plants or soil are absolutely fundamental to our green infrastructure and our forests, and especially our home gardens. But there are some considerations, depending on if you're growing in a pot or in a raised bed. Jen mentioned a couple different methods you can go about, but each one has its own considerations for soil. So here's a healthy soil. I have to confess, I grew up back east, so one of those places literally, you could throw a seed in the backyard and at the end of the summer you'd have a watermelon plant if you spit watermelon seeds off the back porch. So coming out here to Arizona, working with gardeners in this climate, it is a little bit of a challenge, but it's not impossible. And the end result is still a really fun, engaging process, and you can't beat the taste of homegrown, even if it's herbs or full-bore vegetables. It's a very noble pursuit. So I applaud you again for being here and aiming for this fall planting window. But in other parts of the country where it's a little wetter than our climate, you have this high turnover, more organic matter, the growth and death of plants on the soil surface. And so you have this organic matter, this layer, the very first couple inches of topsoil. And unfortunately, in Arizona, it's a little bit different. We don't have such high rates of organic matter in our soil. So I don't know if you can see the two images there, but I just wanted to compare and contrast, the influences of climate on soil type, because ultimately your soil will impact your production method if you're in the ground in the backyard gardening. So contrasted with that grassy soil, here's a profile or a cross section of our typical southern Arizona soil. A little bit of trivia. Just like we have a state bird, the cactus wren, and a state tree, the Palo Verde, we also have a state soil, which is called the Casa Grande soil. But you can see how it's got a very thin layer of topsoil and very light in organic matter. So where a typical soil might have 1 to 5% organic matter, our desert soils will have 1% or less. So that's something to consider if you're getting out the shovel and digging a vegetable bed or a garden in the backyard. in addition to caliche, which, yes, I've heard can require a jackhammer, and Jen can attest. But it is possible. You just want to feed the soil. That's kind of a fundamental concept with regenerative and sustainable agriculture, is as opposed to inundating the system with fertilizers to give the plant nutrition. A lot of regenerative and organic farmers, sustainable farmers, want to try to feed the soil first and foremost and create that healthy root zone full of nutrients and organic matter to help the plant thrive. So we definitely heavily amend our soils here. I recommend adding a thick layer of compost to your vegetable bed, and year after year, because those plants will deplete that nutrient base. With desert soils, though, you'll want to be aware that there is an increased potential for weed seeds and pests to be present. So in addition to the physical labor of amending the soil, you'll want to be cognizant of that. Our desert soils are also a high pH, which means a little more alkaline. So they err on the side of 8, pH 8, the higher side of neutral, which isn't really the preferred pH range for a lot of our vegetables crops. So contrasting that with a sterile media or a raised bed, like Jen alluded to, that gives you some additional control, absolutely. You can choose the content, the growing media that goes into that bed. It might be a little more neutral pH. It could be lighter and easier to work with, especially if it's a small container and it's a store-bought potting mix. And it also starts with a pretty consistent or known quantity, 0, of nutrients. Or you can get it with already pre-amended with fertilizer. So the next topic I wanted to talk about or direct your attention to is water. In the Pima County Master Gardener Program, we field thousands of calls from the public every year through our plant clinic outreach activity. Folks call us up with home gardening and landscape questions, and our volunteers provide them assistance, recommendations, and resources. But hands down, the biggest issue that we encounter is improper watering, either overwatering, underwatering. So one thing we recommend is a soil probe. And here's a picture of me checking my new olive tree last year, making sure you can see the picture on the right. That's the full length of the soil probe. It's about 3 feet long. And so for an establishing tree, you want to make sure that you're getting that soil probe into the wet soil after you've irrigated, that it goes down at least 2 feet. And for more established trees, it should go all the way down to the handle of the soil probe. You should be getting 3 feet deep with your watering. Now for plants, like our annual herbs and vegetables, the root zone is not so developed. So you're only really concerned about that first 8 to 12 inches. So again, your raised container bed or your basin in the ground doesn't need to be too deeply excavated or too deep with growing material, soil mix. But you do want to make sure that the water you're delivering gets down into that soil or that media and reaches the root zone of the plant. So in our region, well, I also wanted to point out that, when you start your vegetable garden, the plants will have different watering needs determined by the crop itself, the species of plant you're growing, its stage of development, and then also your gardening method. Some of our containered plants, have the benefit of all those controls and being portable. You can put it in the windowsill, but it also may evaporate or lose its moisture more quickly too. A very helpful approach here for water conservation and just being precise with how you irrigate is drip irrigation. And there's lots of different ways to do that. It's applicable in the bottom left to field crops, as well as raised beds. You can design a system pretty cheaply. I mean, it'll cost you more in the first year if you go this route. But in the long run, it can be up to 90% more efficient than overhead irrigation. So water conservation is always a concern for us here. There's different ways of doing it. I use this method a lot. It's very effective as well, especially for me at the moment where a lot of my stuff is in containers. I can just spot treat as long as I'm not forgetful. So on the nutrient end of things, fertilizer, I think after you got your site and your system and you've analyzed your soil, and you got a pretty good watering strategy in place, plant nutrition is important, something to think about. So there are 17 nutrients, essential elements that plants need for growth. And this supports everything from cellular processes like respiration and reproduction, which is where you get your fruits and veggies from, the reproductive part of the plant's life cycle. Some of those nutrients you can see are needed in large doses, some are needed in small doses, some come from the soil, and the big ones they get through their leaves, through the atmosphere. There's different options available. There's organic fertilizers, quote unquote, and then there's conventional fertilizers, which are synthesized, but they all convey the essential elements that plants need. So again, there's benefits and pros and cons to each. Some of the conventional fertilizers are really accessible, really reliable, as opposed to the organic fertilizers coming from blood meal, manures. They might have variable nutrient content. So there's a lot of pros to reaching for the all-purpose and the slow release ones too. And I've blacked out the the name brands to not play favorites. But as always, read the label and follow the manufacturer's guidelines. Most of these fertilizers will have specific directions for crops at different stages of their development and different ways of applying them. For the most part, you can incorporate them into the potting mix or the soil before you put the plants in, or you can add them after the fact by sprinkling the granules on top. Okay, one other thing, here's the resources. And again, these will be available to you. The first few are cooperative extension publications, including one from Utah. And then please reach out to Jen and I through our Garden Kitchen and Master Gardener programs. The link here is for our plant clinic, so if you do have any plant health questions, you're welcome to reach us online. We have a new intake form to better serve you online in this remote phase of life with COVID. And finally, I was going to make a plug for mulch. Mulching is a really good practice to conserve soil moisture and impart nutrients and build organic matter in your soil. So as we ease out of summer and hopefully into a pleasant monsoon and fall season, adjust your mulching and irrigating practices accordingly.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both. And now we invite everyone to send in questions using the chat function below. This is such great information, and you've presented it in such an easy to use format. It makes me want to go out and start a garden, which at first honestly was a little intimidating to see. So let's go ahead and we'll start with the questions, and we have one here. Hello from Cochise County. Glad you can join us. With the challenges of COVID, have you all heard about the idea of home micro gardens? We have some folks in Cochise County that would be interested in developing micro gardens that would function in small spaces like RV communities.
Parker, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I was trying to find my mute button. I have not heard about that concept specifically, micro gardens, but it is possible at any scale. And I think one thing that the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us is that there's a tremendous opportunity in collective small gardens, distributed food production.
I would say the same thing. I have heard more of square foot gardening, whereas a very small way to maximize the space that you have, either by using the vertical up and vertical down right next to each other, or companion planting really well. So I think that a lot can be done in a very small space.
Very good. What is a water measuring device?
Sorry about that. I'm just going to leave myself on.
Yeah, that's good.
It depends on the system and the intent. I know a lot of turf folks and overhead irrigation systems will put out catch cans and run it for a set amount of time, run the irrigation and see how much they collect as a way of kind of dialing in or calibrating the irrigation system. For home gardens, like raised beds, the images we shared, that'll be pre-recorded. I brought some little examples here. On drip systems, the emitters will be rated, half gallon, 1 gallon per hour, 2 gallons per hour. So you have a lot of variability and options to conserve water and deliver the precise amount that a plant might need. And then for the drip tape that has the pre-drilled emitters or holes in it, there's standard equations for how much water they put out per 100 feet of tape.
Okay, very good. And do you have any advice for people trying to compost at home? You're on mute again. There you go.
I would say for composting at home, especially if you're in Southern Arizona, it's really important to keep it wet. I mean, it's important everywhere, but it's a special challenge for us. So I have found that the ones that you roll over that are like plastic or large like that are harder to be able to compost just because they lose water very quickly, but air has to get in and out. So I have found that things on the ground work better. And then just to make sure that you have the proper mix of brown and green matter in that compost and are able to move it around often.
Very good. When do you recommend to plant the cool season crops here, like seeds for carrots and greens, and then or starts for winter crops?
Sure. Those are going to have different, let me grab a. So if you get seeds, it usually has something like this on it. It has a little map, and then it's going to tell you the times of year. So depending on what you're going to plant, it might be a little bit different. You could also look at the 10 steps guide. That's going to give you the months about to plant different things depending on your elevation. But I would certainly find out first what zone you're in. So you can just look online and put where you live in and you'll be able to find the zone. And then either look at this guide or look at the maps on the back of your seed packets.
Very good. And we have time for one more. What can you do to keep out the little black mice out of your gardens?
Yeah, that's a tough one. They are pretty darn adaptable and flexible. They can squeak under, I think, a ½ inch or less gap.
Okay.
Jen,
Jen,
do you have any comments
advice?
about garden kitchen? Any barriers you use?
I have used, they are very difficult to keep out, but we have done layers of a hardware cloth sometimes also to make sure that they don't get in. I've also heard that you might be able to use something like a folded metal, just so something that they can't bite through. So things like cardboard or that kind of material isn't going to really help because they'll be able to get through it. So I would try things that are metal solutions.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you both so much. Not only thank you for being here today, but thank you both also for what you're doing in the local communities. It really does mean a lot, and we're very appreciative of that. So looking ahead to next week, August 12th, we invite you to please join us again as we discover exercise and the mind-body connection, featuring Melissa Miles, a certified personal trainer, group exercise instructor, and nutrition specialist. So I know very important, particularly in these times where we can't get out and necessarily have our normal workout routine. Again, thank you for joining us on behalf of Allison, Anne Marie, and myself. Please stay in touch, please stay engaged, and we welcome your questions. Be sure to look out for the post-email evaluation. And as always, we encourage you to bear down and mask up. Have a great week.